You wouldn't believe it, that a handwritten note from a 9-year-old boy, with nothing but kindness and a worn-down pencil, could save the life of a billionaire, standing at the edge of ending it all, right in the heart of Manhattan, in a city where people pass each other like shadows, where noise drowns out every silent scream. A man in a cashmere coat and Italian shoes, living on the top floor of a luxury high-rise on Fifth Avenue, was preparing to take his life. No one knew, no one noticed, and frankly no one cared, until he looked down and saw a small envelope taped to his front door. To anyone who feels like there's nothing left to believe in today. His breath caught. His hand trembled as he opened it. The pencil-scrawled words appeared, crooked, uneven, but somehow exactly what he needed. My name is Aiden. Today is my mom's birthday, but we don't have cake or candles. So instead of wishing for something, I wrote this letter. If someone reads it and feels sad, I hope they'll stay, because good things might come tomorrow. A child who didn't know him, who didn't ask for anything, just sent a little hope into the world, like tossing a bottle into the ocean. That man was Ethan Blake, once hailed as a business genius, a man who had it all, wealth, legacy, family, until he lost everything that truly mattered. Now he sat on the marble floor of his penthouse, clutching a letter from a boy in Brooklyn, and wept for the first time in 6 years. And what he didn't know yet was that little Aiden Carter didn't just save his life that night. He reminded him of the meaning of simply being alive. When Ethan Blake stepped into the elevator to return to his 52nd floor apartment, his hand still clutched the letter, as if it were the last thread tying him to this world. The familiar ding echoed. The doors opened, but this time it wasn't the same cold, silent hallway. Time slowed down. He stood there in the middle of a luxury apartment, once filled with the laughter of his wife and daughter on Christmas mornings. Now only the ticking of the wall clock remained, and a dusty family photo on the shelf, untouched for years. Ethan sat down, opened the letter again, read it, then read it again, and with each reading, something inside him broke open. This child didn't know who he was, didn't know what he was about to do, but somehow those messy pencil-written words pierced the one place he had locked away for years, his loneliness. He had shut out everyone, declined invitations, deleted contacts, refused to be seen. No one had asked him how he felt. No one had seen him cry. No one had truly looked at him. Until now, Aiden Carter, a boy who didn't write to be saved, but wrote to offer the only thing he had, hope. Ethan went online. He searched every word in the letter. Brooklyn, hospital, Julia Carter. Only one result came up. A nurse named Julia, honored for working 12-hour shifts through the holidays, to care for elderly patients. Her photo appeared on the screen, along with this caption, single mom who always carries her son's notebook of daily letters. His heart clenched. That was Aiden's mom. The next day, instead of showing up at the law firm to sign those final papers, Ethan drove across the bridge into Brooklyn, a small coffee shop on the corner, where Julia usually waited for her son after school, was where he stopped. He didn't know what he was going to say. There was no script for a life unraveling quietly. And then he saw them, a boy in a navy jacket, notebook in hand, grinning up at his mom like the world hadn't tried to break him yesterday. They had no idea that this boy had saved a life just 24 hours earlier. Ethan stood there, silent still, watching from across the street. And in that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't going to give up. Not today. Not when boys like Aiden still exist in this world. Ethan came back to the coffee shop the next day, and the day after that, always at 3 p.m., when the sunlight slanted through the windows, and Julia Carter placed her cappuccino on the corner table, waiting for Aiden to get out of school. He never went inside, just watched from across the street, like a stranger, gazing at a life he no longer had the courage to touch. But Aiden was different. The boy was always the first to notice him, bright eyes sparkling, a smile unafraid. On the third day, Aiden walked out of the shop, his little notebook in hand, and headed straight for Ethan. "You're the one who read my letter, right?" he asked, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Ethan froze, and somehow nodded. Aiden smiled. "I hope you weren't sad anymore that day." Ethan knelt down, voice breaking. "You saved me. Do you know that?" The boy shook his head. "I just write for whoever might need it. Mom says sometimes we don't have to know who they are. We just have to believe someone out there needs hope." And in that moment, Ethan felt his heart crack open. Not from pain, but from something blooming again inside him. Faith. From then on, he started walking into the shop. At first, just to return the kindness, a hot cocoa for Aiden, then a book. Then, afternoons spent at the same table. Julia busy jotting notes, Aiden drawing dinosaurs with wax crayons, and Ethan just sitting there listening. Julia didn't say much to him in the beginning, but her eyes watched, as if guarding both sides. A son too kind, and a man too broken. One afternoon, while Aiden went to wash his hands, Julia stayed behind, her voice soft, but direct. "Who are you? Why do you come here every day?" Ethan stared into his cold coffee. Then, for the first time in years, he told his story. About the accident, about that one Christmas, about the birthday cake that never got its candle, and about the letter, with shaky words that read, "For anyone who needs hope today." Julia didn't cry, but her hand trembled slightly as she set it on the table. "I thought I couldn't save anyone anymore," Ethan whispered, "until your son saved me." She didn't reply right away, just nodded once. But in that moment, between the sound of the espresso machine and the smell of warm cookies in the air, something shifted. No music, no fireworks, just two broken people, sitting across from each other, quietly trying to piece themselves back together. Since that evening, Ethan was no longer just a quiet visitor. He became a small part of Julia and Aiden's world, in a way that felt strangely natural. No one talked about it, no one made promises. But every afternoon, when Aiden walked into the shop after school, he'd always ask the same thing. "Is Mr. Ethan coming today?" Some days, Ethan brought an old book from his private library. Other days, he sat drawing dinosaurs with Aiden, even though he could never remember if a stegosaurus tail was supposed to curve or stay straight. One evening, after closing up the cafe, Julia walked Ethan to the curb as usual. Snow had just started to fall. Under the soft yellow glow of the street lamp, she pulled her coat tight and asked, without looking at him, "Do you have a family?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. The wind cut through the silence, cold enough to sting old memories. "I used to," he said softly. "A wife, a little girl. She used to write letters to Santa, even when she knew he wasn't real." He gave a faint smile. "I lost them, in a plane crash, on Christmas Day. It was the day I lost myself too." Julia turned to him, not with pity, not with shock, but with a kind of empathy that reached bone deep. She shared her story. Her husband died in a car accident on his way to buy cough syrup for Aiden. She had dropped out of her psychology degree after that, worked as a nurse, raised Aiden alone, and stopped believing in miracles, until my son started writing letters. Every night, to people we don't know yet. They stood there quietly. Snow fell around them, soft like whispers from time. Ethan looked at Julia, a woman who had learned to survive the coldest winds of life, and realized she was stronger than anyone he'd ever met. The next morning, Ethan visited a local elementary school. He offered to fund a small program called Letters of Light, a place where students could write handwritten notes to elderly people living alone in the city. He didn't sign his name. He just left a small note, because once a boy believed that hope should be shared, even with strangers. Within weeks, the program spread across states. A local TV station aired a segment titled, "The Boy Whose Handwritten Letters Healed a Stranger's Heart." And it didn't take long before the whole country knew Aiden Carter. Julia panicked. She feared the attention would steal her son's innocence, that the very reason he started writing would disappear under the spotlight. But Ethan looked at her and said slowly, "He doesn't need to be famous. He just needs to know he saved someone. And that kindness doesn't need applause. It only needs to continue." Julia understood. She stopped just surviving, and for the first time in many years, she began to truly live. In the days that followed, Aiden began waiting for Ethan outside the coffee shop, his little backpack slung to one side, holding a worn-out blue notebook in one hand. He didn't call him Mr. anymore. "Can I call you Mr. E? It's short, easier to write." Ethan laughed, truly laughed. Not the polite, distant smile he'd worn for years, but a real, unguarded laugh. He nodded, and from that day on, Mr. E appeared in every letter Aiden wrote. "Dear Mr. E, today I wrote an essay about someone I admire. I wrote about you, but my teacher said it had to be someone famous. I turned it in anyway." Ethan read that letter while sitting in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by cold, expensive furniture. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone in that space. A child's handwriting, scribbled on school paper, had lit up the entire room. One weekend afternoon, Aiden asked Ethan to go to Central Park. They brought along a homemade kite, built from old newspaper and string. The wind was strong. The kite flew low, then slowly higher. Ethan stood behind Aiden, holding the line with him. And suddenly, he heard laughter. Not from anyone else. It was his own. Julia stood in the distance, half smiling, half tearing up. Her heart, once sealed shut from too much loss, beat faster for something different. Not love, not yet, but something deeper, something gentler, a flicker of hope, watching her son be loved so purely. That night, as Ethan was about to leave, Aiden ran after him to the door. "Mr. Ethan, can I ask you something?" Ethan knelt down, eyes soft with attention. "If I don't have a dad, and you don't have a kid, would you maybe want to be my dad? No paperwork, just the feeling." The world fell quiet. Street sounds faded into the background. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked into Aiden's eyes, so full of hope, yet all too familiar with disappointment. Then, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder, he spoke, voice hoarse with emotion. "You know, Aiden, that's the greatest gift anyone's ever given me." Aiden smiled, as if the world just became a little safer. He didn't need a promise. He just needed to know that Ethan would come back tomorrow. And he would. Not just for Aiden, but for himself. A man who once believed he had nothing left to live for. Ethan had never entered a hospital like a regular person. In the past, he was always the benefactor, the man on stage cutting ribbons, signing 8-figure checks, leaving to the sound of applause. But today, he sat quietly in the staff waiting area, holding a cold, bland cup of coffee, waiting for Julia to finish her shift. He hadn't told her he was coming. He just wanted to see her world, the place she returned to every night, exhausted, yet still full of enough love to read Aiden's letters, strong enough to not collapse. She stepped out, hair pulled back in a rushed bun, white blouse wrinkled, eyes shadowed with fatigue, yet still lit with life. When she saw him, she froze. A long pause filled the space between them. "What are you doing here?" Her voice wasn't cold, just too surprised to be soft. Ethan stood. "I wanted to see where you fight every day." Julia didn't answer right away. She wasn't used to this man, the former CEO of a billion-dollar empire, now standing like an old friend waiting without pretense. After a moment, she nodded. "Come with me." She led him through long hallways under dim fluorescent lights, past ventilators, keyboard clicks, and nameless hospital beds. With every step, he felt himself leaving behind the world of luxury and walking deeper into hers. A world she had survived, where she had fought to keep others alive, while he once thought about giving up. "You know," she said quietly as they stopped near a window, overlooking the city, "I used to study psychology at NYU. But when the accident happened, my husband died. Aiden was only 2. I dropped out and did whatever I could to earn a living." Ethan didn't speak, but his hand clenched. "There were moments I thought, if I just disappeared, it might feel like relief." But then Aiden started writing letters. To strangers. He believed if someone out there was sad, a kind word might change their day. Her voice broke. "I never thought one of the people reading those letters would be you." He looked at her, not with the gaze of a man who once owned the world, but of someone who had lost it and was now touching something more precious than any fortune. "You and Aiden saved me, Julia," he said softly, as if confessing a painful truth he'd kept buried for years. She turned away, wiping tears from her eyes. That night, when Ethan returned to his old apartment, he wrote a letter. For the first time, he didn't sign it with a title. He simply wrote, "From a man who thought he had no value, until a little boy taught him that hearts can come back to life." He placed the letter in a golden envelope, slipped it into the mailbox of a local television station. He didn't need anyone to know his name, but he wanted the world to know that the kindness of a child can save the soul of a man who thought he was already gone. After that night, Ethan was no longer the man who lived alone in a cold penthouse. He still lived there, but his heart had moved elsewhere, to a small coffee shop near Aiden's elementary school, or the night shift break room, where Julia sometimes fell asleep beside a cup of cold coffee. He never said it out loud, but the changes began to show, quietly, persistently. One Monday morning, Julia received a letter from NYU. Inside was a notification. She had been reconsidered for a partial scholarship, a special program for single mothers who once enrolled and now wished to complete their unfinished dreams. She had applied 3 years ago, never heard back, Until now. She read the letter over and over, tears falling silently, unaware that a man had called the university board weeks before, never giving his real name, only saying he was someone whose life was saved by a letter from her son. At the same time, in another borough, the very first letter Aiden had left, outside the Fifth Avenue apartment, was now going viral on social media. A local news station staffer had found it and posted it online. Thousands of comments poured in. Hundreds of strangers shared stories of dark days brightened because of that one letter, days they had almost given up, until a child's handwriting reminded them to stay. A teacher from another state wrote, "I printed Aiden's letter and posted it on our classroom board. My students started writing letters to seniors at a nearby nursing home." Ethan read those words, his throat tightening, and then an idea took root. Simple, powerful. If one letter could save him, maybe thousands of letters could save the world, or at least a small part of it. And so the Letters of Light project was born, a nonprofit, anonymously funded, calling on students across the country to write handwritten letters to elderly people living alone or long-term hospital patients without visitors. No one knew Ethan was behind it, and no one needed to, because for him, seeing Aiden smile as he read a handwritten reply from an old man in Florida, that was enough. Julia began attending university again. Ethan picked Aiden up every afternoon, took him to the library, sat beside him as he penned one new letter each week, then helped him place the stamped envelope into the blue public mailbox on the corner of their street. They never called themselves family, but everything, every gesture, every look, every sunset walk they shared, quietly redefined the word. That February, New York was still cold, but inside Aiden Carter's heart, something had started to thaw, a quiet warmth growing day by day. The 9-year-old boy had no idea that his shaky handwriting and honest heart were making their way through lonely walls all across America. One afternoon, Julia rushed to pick Aiden up from school. Her face looked unusual, half shock, half disbelief. "Someone from Washington, D.C. wants to meet you," she whispered, voice caught between awe and nerves. That night, inside a small city auditorium, Aiden, the boy who once left a simple letter for anyone who needs hope today, stood before hundreds of adults, cameras flashing, lights beaming down. He was being honored with the Healing Words Award, a national recognition newly established for small actions that made a profound impact on mental health and human connection. The presenter read aloud an excerpt from one of Aiden's letters, written to an 83-year-old woman undergoing cancer treatment. "I don't know who you are, but if you're feeling sad, please know there's a boy named Aiden in Brooklyn who believes you're strong enough to get through this. And if you need someone to hear you, I can write 100 more letters." The entire room rose to its feet. Applause thundered for minutes. From the back row, Ethan sat holding Julia's hand. He hadn't cried this much since the day he lost his wife and daughter. But this time, his tears weren't for grief. They were for hope. After the ceremony, reporters surrounded Aiden. He didn't know how to answer their questions. He didn't understand how a single letter could make people cry, could make someone say, "You saved me." But then he looked over at Ethan, who gave him a soft, reassuring nod, and Aiden said something quiet, almost shy, but powerful enough to stop every camera lens. "I just thought, if one letter could help Mr. Ethan, maybe it could help other people too. That's all. That's all." 2 simple words from a child, enough to spark a nationwide movement. Letters of Light was officially adopted into social-emotional learning programs in more than 13 states. Thousands of students began writing letters each month. Elderly patients, veterans, people living in isolation, all began receiving handwritten notes, filled with warmth, compassion, and belief. No one had to say it aloud, but everyone knew. That very first letter, left one winter morning, on the doorstep of a penthouse on Fifth Avenue, had become the first flame, one that helped melt the frost in hearts all across the country. 1 year after that first letter, the lives of Ethan, Julia, and Aiden had changed in ways none of them ever expected. Aiden was no longer the quiet boy, writing letters by the window of a tiny Brooklyn apartment. He had become a symbol of kindness, yet remained as innocent and pure as the day he first pressed pencil to paper. He still rode his bike to school, still drew dinosaurs after every quiz, and still wrote a letter every night, not for fame, but because I just know someone out there might need it. Julia, once a nurse pulling endless night shifts, was now a second-year psychology student. Thanks to a scholarship from an anonymous foundation, she guessed was Ethan, but they never spoke of it. Ethan didn't need thanks, and Julia didn't need confirmation. They both held that truth in quiet respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, with golden leaves falling softly outside, Ethan invited them to his penthouse, the same place he once called his gilded cage after losing everything. "I want to show you something," he said, eyes shining with something different now. The apartment had changed. The glass walls overlooking Central Park were now covered in handwritten letters, not from Ethan, but from hundreds of children across America, sent to the Letters of Light program. The entire space looked like a living map of compassion, each sentence a candle, lit in someone's darkness. And in the very center, framed carefully, hung the first letter, Aiden's crooked handwriting still visible. Below it, in Ethan's hand, a single line read, "This letter saved me from the dark and gave me a reason to become human again." Julia stood there for a long time, saying nothing. She held Aiden's hand. He still didn't fully grasp how much he had done, but he could feel that something was melting, something was healing. "I have a plan," Ethan said, his voice warm. "I want to turn this place into a center for teen mental health support, a space for kids who hide their pain behind phone screens, and I want you to run it." Julia stared at him, stunned. "Ethan, you're the woman who raised a boy, who saw sadness in others, and knew how to heal it with the simplest things." Ethan interrupted, gently but firmly. "The world needs more of that, and you know how." Aiden looked up, eyes bright. "So this place is our new home?" Ethan knelt down, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder, just like he once did for his own daughter. "No, Aiden, this is home for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong." And in that moment, there was no music, no final speech, just the quiet knowing, a look, a hand held tight, and the feeling that they were no longer lost, no longer alone. On the second Christmas Eve, the building on Fifth Avenue, once the coldest penthouse in New York, now shone like a star in the heart of the city. Outside, snow blanketed the rooftops. Inside, the apartment, now transformed into a warm community center, glowed with a fireplace, armchairs, and stacks of handwritten letters from children across the country. They called this place simply the listening room. Ethan stood by the window, a cup of hot cocoa in hand, gazing out at the park where he once sat alone, with a small birthday cake. This year, he was not alone. Julia was laughing at the front desk, coordinating the Christmas party for the kids. There was no more heaviness in her eyes, only a gentle light, the kind that comes from choosing to forgive the past and walk forward. Aiden, now 10, stood in the center of the room, holding a letter, the first letter. His voice trembled as he read, but each word sank into the quiet, softening every breath in the room. "To anyone who needs hope today, my name is Aiden. My mom says I should write letters when I feel sad. But today, I'm writing this for someone else, because I think maybe they're sadder than I am." When he finished, the room erupted in applause, but all eyes turned to Ethan, the man who once stood on the edge, now smiling in golden light, tears glistening without shame. He stepped forward, placed a hand on Aiden's shoulder. "You didn't just write a letter," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You rewrote my life." Julia joined them, taking Ethan's hand. "And you reminded me that even what seems unhealable can still be loved." In that room, people didn't speak of loss through tears, but through presence, through simply being there. Ethan didn't need to search for his family anymore. He had found it, in the very place he once thought life would end. None of us ever really know how much a small act can save someone. A letter, a hug, a simple question, "Are you okay?" Sometimes that's all someone needs to hold on. This world isn't short on sorrow, but the miracle is, kindness is free. And when you give it, you just might save someone, even yourself. If you believe in the power of kindness, share this story, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs it right now. Like, share, and subscribe to help us spread stories that remind the world humanity is still gentle.